Morning, everybody.
Morning.
I'm Rick Ucker. Thanks for coming to my session. I'd like to talk to you this morning about pair programming. Obviously, it's a very core practice to Pillar. Most of us in the room, if not all, have done it. I know we've got a couple people who are non-programmers amongst us, so we'll kind of go over some of the finer points there. What I'd like to talk to you about is some of the specifics as I see them, as far as what works, what doesn't work, and the things that we can do to be effective pair partners when we're working with other people. So, a little bit about me. I have to remember not to shake my mouse while I'm talking. A little bit about me. I've been with Pillar for almost 4 years. I joined in 2015. I've been a developer for about 9 years. So I've got plenty of experience. Almost half my career, not quite, has been in the pair programming world that we've got here, but I've got plenty of experience working in your typical non-pair programming kind of environment. So I've learned some lessons about what works and doesn't work in that world and how pair programming solves some of those issues. And at the same time, maybe has some of its own, but we can talk through ways to address those. So, life before pairing for me, we all know what the open team space is, right? It's almost like all of us sitting together in this room with our laptops. It's been the hot thing in the enterprise world for at least 10 years. I'm not sure exactly when they started adopting that, but we've probably all at one time or another worked like that. Before I came to Pillar, I was at large enterprise in Columbus, have their headquarters there, big blue logo. Most of us have probably heard them. And open team spaces everywhere. And you know, the open team space is supposed to be collaborative. It's supposed to foster communication. It's supposed to help us not be walled off in cubicles or offices and collaborate. Well, we all know what tends to really happen is that kind of environment's noisy, right? There's always either business-related chit-chat, personal chit-chat, activity, noise, people entertaining themselves, what have you, and it kind of comes to an environment where it gets difficult to get work done. So what happens? Everyone starts wearing headphones and earbuds, listening to music to drown out the noise, which is completely counter to the point. You're supposed to be open, you're supposed to be talking with each other, you're supposed to collaborate, yet everyone's doing this because they can't concentrate. So what I've found, and that's why, by the way, that's why I refer to it as the paradox of the open team space, because we end up closing ourselves off anyway. And what I've found is that pair programming really takes care of, at least in my experience for that, takes care of that issue. We're still in an open team space, but instead of being solo, working on our thing at our own pace, we've got a person that we're responsible for and answerable to, that we're collaborating with. Typically what I find is we're working with that person, we're discussing problems, we're solving the issue together. All of that background noise sort of doesn't really become an issue anymore. It's much easier to remain focused and engaged in what you're doing. So I think that's one of the really awesome intentional or unintentional side effects of what makes pair programming so awesome. I guess one of the things that was an issue for me to give up coming to Pillar, or that maybe scared me a little bit, it was kind of giving up the kind of me time. That's the thing that's really nice about that kind of environment, right? You're on your own, you're on your computer, you can take care of your personal affairs while you're working. We all end up on social media and what have you, which isn't terribly productive, but we get to do what we want, right? That was part of getting out of my comfort zone, was realizing, okay, I'm going to be pairing with someone, I'm going to be working directly with someone all the time, that's going to go out the window. It sure has, it was an adjustment, but definitely a positive one for me. I've never been more productive or learned more in my career than I have through pair programming at Pillar. So before we really get into the specifics here, I feel the need to give you a couple of disclaimers. I'm going to be sort of preaching off my chest about a lot of things that I think are good and bad, some do's and don'ts about practices. That said, I don't always embody the positive aspects of this, so I'm casting the first stone anyway. And I also do from time to time commit some of the things I'm going to say you shouldn't. So I'm going to be speaking about sort of the ideal situation here. Another thing I want to touch on is people's learning styles. We all know that there's a bunch of different ones out there. Typically they're kind of characterized as these 7 that I've got here. You've got your visual spatial learning, which is a matter of preferring using pictures and images, spatial understanding. Your your oral learning, auditory, musical, where people learn best through sound and music. There's the verbal or linguistic type, which prefers using words and speech and writing, either listening or speaking to other people. There's the physical kinesthetic learner, which I don't find many people that in our line of work that identify as a kinesthetic learner, because it's not very conducive to be sitting at a computer. It's wildly gesticulating. There's the logical mathematical type, which using logic, reasoning, and building systems. That sounds really up our alley, right? Because this is what we're doing as programmers. We're building systems, we're using logic, and we're solving problems that way. I find that I actually fall into the next category, which is the social type learner, or interpersonal. And this is someone who prefers learning in a participatory fashion with groups of other people. And at least in my experience, I think this is why I love pair programming so much. I've paired with, I see at least 2 people in the room that I've paired with, 3. And I love it. We're talking about things, we're kind of wondering things aloud to each other, we're solving problems together, we're talking through it. And for me, that's perfect. That's right up my alley. There's also finally the solitary learner, which I absolutely know I'm not, which is the type of person who will just work alone, self-study. They can devour academic books just for fun. Anyone in the room that type of person? No one was raising their hand. Okay, maybe one?
I can do it if I'm really interested in the subject, but if it's just like, okay, Callie, we want you to learn this skill on your own for like the project, I'm gonna kind of slack off and like daze in and out of concentration.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely. I need to be throwing myself at an actual problem to learn something, and it helps to be doing it with other people. But yeah, the academic type, I sort of envy that kind of person who can just go read, Unix programming book or something and, start writing kernel code. Like, I just can't do that. I think it's great, but that's not me. So I just want to, I bring these up because I want people to consider what their own learning type might be, as well as the people you work with. I tend to think that most people fall at least partially into the social aspect, because that seems to be the type of people we are really good at attracting. Now, I think all of us in the room know the answer to this question, but what is pair programming? Well, for those of you who grew up watching lots of Sesame Street like I did, you might recognize these 2 guys, the two-headed monster, and something about a song about 2 heads being better than one that always stuck with me. And by the way, by complete coincidence, the session that was in this room before me happened to have some, I don't know what they were doing, but they ended up putting these Muppet drawings on the wall. And this one with Elmo here, I think is a perfect quote even for what we're talking about. If you want to go if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think that's perfect. That really describes what I think the best of pair programming is we're going to go into some more detail, but it is 2 people working together rather than one person just let me take care of this and you hang out, right? We all know that happens sometimes. So basically, in a nutshell, 2 minds on one problem. Some of the benefits that we get out of it is instant rubber duck debugging. Has anyone not heard of that term before? Okay. So rubber duck debugging, typically, it's a story that gets told a lot in programming circles. It's sort of a hypothetical story about a junior developer who joins a team. And of course, as someone who's not very experienced and new to whatever they're working on, going to have lots of questions. There are going to be lots of things they don't know, right? So what does this person do? Of course, they're going to approach a senior developer frequently with lots of questions, which is a completely natural thing to do. You want these answers, right? Well, the senior programmer starts to get a little frustrated because being distracted by these questions, it can be difficult to actually still focus on what you're doing. So one day he comes to the junior developer and he says, okay, I tell you what, the next time you want to ask me a question, he takes a rubber duck out of his pocket, puts it on the desk. He says, ask the duck first. And he leaves. So the junior developer, the next time he gets stuck, he goes through the exercise. He says, duck, I'm having this problem with the application where I'm trying to do X. I perform steps A, B, and C. I expect the result Y, but it's not working. And come to think of it, I think I know what the issue is. just being forced to go through that explanation, although as you're explaining to someone, more often than not, kind of takes care of it. It helps you take care of the problem because it forces you to think logically through it. So, my point, I refer to that as instant rubber duck debugging. We're working together with another person. We sort of get that in real time as we try to figure something out. I know I do this a lot, where I'll sort of ask a hypothetical question. What would happen if X, Y, Z? What would happen if we wrote the module this way? And a lot of times my partner will say either, well, here's what I think will happen, or the answer might be, let's try it out. We do it together. It's fantastic. Another big benefit of pair programming is that it's a check against going down rabbit holes. I think we've all done that. I used to do it. I mean, I think everyone has, especially when you're doing it in a solitary fashion, except maybe Magnus, but he's sort of abnormal, so we won't use him as an example. We've all been in a situation where we're trying to solve this problem, and we know if we just throw ourselves at it hard enough, we're going to figure it out. And a lot of times what happens is 2 hours later, we still haven't figured it out. We spend a bunch of time chasing after what we think is a solution, and it ends up being wrong. We're frustrated, we're burned out, we're stressed out, and we've just wasted 2 hours of our day. A lot of the time when you're working with another person and you're both engaged in what you're doing and you're doing a good job of sort of socializing what the problem is and what potential solutions might be, you end up not going down that rabbit hole at all, which is great. Because I think we all know what it feels like to be at the bottom of that hole and think, man, I wish I hadn't come down here. Code reviews are another big thing. Typically what we do on teams, you might have a pair of people working on a feature. They open a pull request to get that thing into master, and other people review it. This is still an important thing we do, but and it's always historically always very important, because somebody working alone on something, especially non-trivial for long periods of time, they need to have other people sort of check their work and make sure they're not forgetting something or didn't clean up something, any number of small issues. We still do that, but when you're pairing, you sort of get that instant code review as you go, in the ideal sense. We all know that we don't always get 100% engagement from our partner or from ourselves, right? So that's sort of the ideal situation. And a lot of the practices. Switch screens on myself here. Here we go. A lot of the things we're going to talk about today are a two-way street. There's give and take, right? There's leadership, and there's sort of learning from the other person, letting them lead. There's a time for all of this stuff. So, what I believe to be the positive outcomes of pair programming are higher trust with your partner, and as we rotate partners, the rest of the team. Higher level of creativity as we collaborate on things and figure out what the best solution is. An environment of learning, which really helps everyone involved, rather than just putting all the burden on a smaller number of people while other people coast. And overall, I think the sum of these things is higher quality in general. Higher quality of our work, our deliverables, our relationships with our clients. So with pair programming, there's what I believe are two main styles of how you can pair. They're vastly different. What I would call the first style that we'll talk about is sort of the dictator-transcriber model of pair programming, aka the hive mind or the mind meld, for reasons that will become clear. This basically means you have two people at a workstation. One person talks while the other person transcribes what they're saying. It's not easily done, and I submit that it's not really the best way to do it. I'd like to read an anecdote to you about that. This is from a book called Free as in Freedom, Richard Stallman's crusade for free software. This is a free O'Reilly book online. So this is a story about Guy Steele, who's a language designer, and Richard Stallman, which, if you're not familiar with him, I know at least one person in the room is here. He's he's instrumental to the free software movement, first of all, and he's probably a more brilliant programmer than any of us will have the opportunity to work with. Anyway, this is a story about these two pairing in what I call the dictator-transcriber mode. This is in the late 1970s, and they were working on the pre-print feature for the Emacs codebase. So there you go, Magnus. We sat down one morning, recalls Steele, I was at the keyboard and he was at my elbow. He was perfectly willing to let me type, but he was also telling me what to type. The programming session lasted 10 hours. Throughout that entire time, Steele says, neither he nor Stallman took a break or made any small talk. By the end of the session, they had managed to hack the pretty print source code to just under 100 lines. Steele says, my fingers were on the keyboard the whole time, but it felt like both of our ideas were flowing onto the screen. He told me what to type, and I typed it. The length of the session revealed itself when Steele finally left the AI lab. Standing outside the building at 545 Tech Square, he was surprised to find him surrounded by nighttime darkness. As a programmer, Steele was used to marathon coding sessions. Still, something about the session was different. Working with Stallman had forced Steele to block out all external stimuli and focus his entire mental energies on the task at hand. Looking back, Steele says he found the Stallman mind meld both exhilarating and scary at the same time. Quote, my first thought afterward was, it was a great experience, very intense, and I never wanted to do it again in my life. So I bring this up because this is sort of the way that we tend to do it sometimes, and I would say that, at least in the context of the work that we do, I think this is sort of an anti-practice for a lot of reasons. In our 9-to-5 office environment, being able to sort of do the mind meld like those guys did isn't very feasible when you're in an open team space and you've got meetings and you've got a schedule to keep. If you have nothing else to do and no one else to have discussions with or anything like that, maybe it'll work pretty well. I just don't think that it's the office environment is very conducive to it. That said, if anybody ever wants to try it sometime, I'm game. So typically what we do is the second style, which I refer to as driver navigator. You've got one person driving and the other person navigating or being the co-pilot. We all know the setup. I think when it works best, we've got one workstation with 2 keyboards, 2 mice, maybe 2 monitors, maybe one that you're both sharing. Point being, you're both focused on the same work on the same machine. Maybe sometimes you turn to your own personal laptop to do some Googling for your pair partner to figure out what you're doing. But the point is, either one of you can take over and drive at any time. You just kind of try to find a natural way. Maybe you do a little ping pong where one person writes a test and the other one makes it pass, or maybe you do something else. But even in this context, the dynamics between you and your partner are going to be very important, and that extends to the rest of the team. To be an effective pair partner, I've identified what I would say are the 4 virtues of an effective pair partner. I could definitely name you people who exemplify these, and at least in my experience, they tend to be the people who are the most valued by their teammates, and just in general, are what I would just call great people. The virtues are humility, empathy, a teaching and learning mindset, and supportiveness. And what I mean by humility is not in the sense of you should be humble as in you should be meek. What I mean is you should never be too proud to learn things or to take corrections or to be corrected by someone. You know, we all know that we've had these moments where you maybe have a PR open and someone makes a comment on it and we feel kind of pissed off. Like we feel like defensive of it, like what are they coming in here doing this for? That's kind of what I mean when I say humility. And this is also when you're pairing with someone and they say, well, hey, you made a mistake. That's what they're there for. So don't be afraid, or please, try not to let it get under your skin. Of course, feedback can always be delivered in the appropriate way too, which we'll get into a little bit, because there are definitely good and bad ways to say the same thing. There's, I think you messed up the syntax there versus, what are you doing, stupid? So one quote that I know has been on the Pillar website is still there because I checked yesterday, and has been there for at least as long as I've worked at Pillar, is that there's no single smartest person in the room. I don't remember how I found it. It must have been pointed out when I was going through the talent process. It really stuck with me because I think that's very important. Sure, we have people that we look up to and we want to be as good as, or any number of ways, but no one should walk in there thinking, man, nobody's as good as me. I'm just going to tell them what to do. That's sort of antithetical to the collaborative sort of environment we want to have together. Second virtue, empathy. What I mean by empathy is the capacity to understand or feel what another person might be experiencing from their frame of reference. This becomes really important because I think we've probably all had some negative experiences where maybe the other person is driving us crazy and they don't seem to notice. Empathy is a tricky thing because it's more of a natural trait. It can be learned, but some people just aren't going to have as much as others. Sometimes you really have to be very direct with the person and say, hey, I think what you're doing is bad for me. They might not never notice otherwise. So that's a tricky thing. Picking up on social cues. We all know that some people are better at that than others. A couple of easy questions maybe you can ask yourself if you're wondering if you're being a good pair partner. Am I maybe trampling on this person? Am I dragging them along for the ride? Or are they participating? Am I challenging them enough? Or are they, conversely, the other way around, right? Are they challenging me? Or am I just hanging out while they do all the work because they won't let me? Two-way street. The third virtue is the teaching and learning mindset. So this is one of the things that I think was really part of the kind of the special sauce of pair programming, because one of the things I value most about my time at Pillar is everything that I've learned. I mean, if I could plot you a graph of time mapped to my knowledge level, it went from being sort of a linear progression to an exponential progression as soon as I joined Pillar. I mean, I'm sort of amazed with myself how far I've come. I thought it was pretty good when I came on board, and now I think, man, I didn't know anything yet. And it's been great, and a big part of it is all the great people that we've got, but also that comes out sort of naturally when pairing is being done well. Like I said, the presentation means a lot. I'll give you a small example that I've witnessed before. We've got two people pairing, and maybe, sorry about that, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm hitting a button on my mouse here. We've got two people pairing, and maybe one of them has been driving for a day and a half, sort of, hogging the keyboard. Maybe they don't even notice, which is a separate issue, but they're just going to town on this thing. The other person finally gets a chance to jump in and say, okay, my time. I'm going to drive. I think I know what I'm going to do. Let me start to write this statement. Halfway through, the other person goes, no, not like that. Takes the keyboard back and starts typing again. The message needs to be delivered, right? Maybe there's a better way to write it than the second person started to do it. But as opposed to, no, don't do that. It's as simple as, let them write the statement. Say, that's good, but maybe you can write it like this instead. Let me show you a better way. That helps engage the person instead of sort of like shoving them aside and just trying to do it yourself. And again, you're delivering the same message, right? That maybe you know a better way. That's the difference between just sort of disregarding someone and teaching them. On the flip side of that, we also have to consider, learnable moments, right? Because we're going to be on the receiving end of this just as often as the giving end at one point or another. So we need to be prepared to and willing to learn from our pair partners. It'll always happen. I mean, I can be pairing with someone far beyond my skill level or far beneath it, and there's always going to be some aspect of what we're working on that the other person probably knows better than I am, which is what makes that collaboration so great. And one of the very small things that I always talk up to non-Pillarites about pairing is, well, first of all, anyone who's worked with me knows that I'm really big on command line stuff. I love to do. If I could spend my entire career in Tmux and Vim using Bash, I would, because I love it. And my point is, I like to be close to things that are going on disk. What's my IDE actually doing? I'm going to kind of play around with these tools by hand. But I do a lot of that, and what I find when I pair with other people who sort of share that curiosity, I pick up all kinds of little things. Hey, what was that little shortcut that you just used? What was that alias? How did you do that in Git? I didn't know you could do that. Those kinds of things. That's sort of like this great little positive. It's not even a deliberate intention, but it just sort of happens organically. And I think that's fantastic. That's how I've learned a lot. Do you have something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm new, and if you're paired with somebody, we're all poly guys.
Yeah.
When it comes to when you hit the real stuff, you might be paired with somebody who knows, say, Kotlin, or whatever you're doing JavaScript. You don't know that. So how do you? It's going to slow you down at first at times as a pair. So, I assume that everybody is just empathetic, lets them learn at their pace, and then hopefully take up the pace, right? So, instead of an expectation of you coming in and just both flying with it, which isn't realistic all the time, right? So, so how's it work with Pillar? prepare with that kind of situation?
Yeah, I'll give you my answer from my experience is exactly what you mentioned there. Sort of slow it down so you can speed it up later.
Yeah.
Bring the other person along. I'm really big on this because I know some people, being the person who knows the answer, might be a little frustrated, right? Because they just want to do the thing.
Yeah.
Well, what happens in that situation is the person who isn't getting a chance to learn this, they're sort of being robbed of the opportunity to be a productive, helpful pair partner if they can't learn this stuff, right? So this is an argument that I've had with people a lot, where there's sort of a balance between like I just want to get it in there fast,
Yeah.
versus let's figure it out the right
What's
way.
the point of pairing?
Yes.
It's totally the opposite of what pairing should be. Right? So,
Right.
so there are places where I paired, and it was like that. They're expecting you to be a polygon and fly. That's not realistic all the time. In the beginning. So yeah, I see that as being a huge part of and acknowledging, seeing that, and being able to slow down with your pairing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you on that. Being able to slow down, uplift. We talk about uplift with respect to the client. That applies to your teammates too.
Yeah, because I mean, eventually they'll speed up. That's all my team needs. So
Yeah.
I paired with somebody that didn't know, answer the questions and didn't know anything. So now I know it. So yeah.
I think some of my favorite people at Pillar that I've had the opportunity to work with are the people who are good mentors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a huge attribute. You're right. The fourth virtue of an effective pair partner is supportiveness. We all know that we're, or at least ideally, hopefully, we are concerned with the success of our client, our project, our team within the project. While taking that another step further, we should be concerned with our pair partner's success. Are they in the seat next to me while I do all the work because I don't trust them, or am I teaching them? Am I dragging them along with me, or are they actively, navigating for me? It's tricky to get right because the other person has to want to learn, right? Hopefully we all do, but it's definitely something that we have to work at so that we can be more effective together. So when you've got all these things embodied, I think that removes the fear of failure, which we all have, right? We're all afraid that we're going to blow something up or something's going to get, we're going to have a failed deployment in production or something along those lines, and people are going to point the finger of shame at us, and nobody wants that. When you've got better practices, people trust each other more, that becomes less of an issue. I think a really eye-opening moment for me was my first real client project at Pillar. The first time that I broke a build, I expected to be shamed for it, which is what I was used to from my previous enterprise job. But really, just the tech lead came over and said, "Hey, do you know this? The build's broken? Can I help you fix it?" That was it. Oh, I thought, oh man, geez, great. I'm not going to get made fun of. It was a big relief, and that's the way it ought to be, right? So it's all about building trust. If we can trust each other, we can work better together. Our client can trust us, and we can deliver better things to them. I'd like to run through what I kind of call the pairing do's. Like we mentioned, look out for your pair partner. Be concerned with their success. And likewise, they should be concerned with yours. We want to offer opportunities to help each other learn from their mistakes. Again, like the broken build thing, right? Not, hey stupid, can you fix the stuff that you broke so everyone can stop waiting around for you? Versus, let's fix this together. That makes a huge difference. It's collaborative rather than sort of take care of your stuff, guy, Be present. This is very, very big for me. And again, I'm not perfect, so I will cop to being guilty of this, but how many times have we been pairing where we're the one driving and one of a couple of things happens? Either we sort of figure out something we've been trying to figure out, or we kind of come to a point where we're confused about where to go, or we have a question. We make a remark to our partner, and I'm not sure what we're supposed to do here. Was this actually in the requirements? And your partner is going, yeah, okay. What? We've all seen that, right? We've all done it. But that's kind of what I mean when I say be present. It's definitely a deliberate habit. I've made a conscious effort to just kind of not pay attention to my phone when I'm working. Because, hey, it's a context switch, right? We talk about that with respect to, I really need to focus on this problem before we pivot to this other story or what have you, because the mental burden of context switching is real. Well, that's a smaller context switch, right? Going from Twitter back to what you were working on, it causes mental fatigue. We have to catch up. The other person's going to be waiting for us to remember what we're even talking about. The phone thing is a small example, but it can be any number of stuff. So my request for everyone is do your best to be present with your partner when you're not driving. Now, with respect to driving, you should definitely make sure both people are driving and not just one, while the other one is sort of hanging out. Let them drive. Make them if you have to. We've probably all heard of imposter syndrome, which is we've probably all experienced at one point or another. I have, where you've got this job, you're at work, things are going wrong, or you're not figuring something out, and there's this voice in your head saying, "Oh God, I don't think I belong here. Everyone else is smarter than me, and I'm just faking it," right? That may be something that's going on with your partner, and why they're reluctant to put their hands on the keyboard. Coax them into it if you need to. Make sure that they're doing that, because that's how they really engage their brain, right? Is actually being the one typing out the code rather than just watching. You can do your best to be present, but if you don't get a chance to really be the one writing stuff, then you're going to have issues. Oops. Talking to your partner as you work is important too. I know it's another deliberate habit, right? We're coding on something at home. We might go hours without saying a word to anybody, because why would you, right? Unless we talk aloud to ourselves. That's a problem when you're pairing, because if you're just slinging code and you're flying through this thing, your partner's probably, hopefully reading along, but they might not know what on earth you're doing or what you're thinking about doing next for that regard. I paired with one guy once a couple of years ago, brilliant guy, but by the time he typed his first statement, he was already thinking about 3 abstractions from now what he was going to be doing. And it was difficult because I had no idea what was in his head. And he sort of, it was that empathy thing where he didn't do the best job of, okay, let's write this class, and what I'm thinking is we'll extract these things to an interface after we write a couple of tests or what have you, right? But as he starts to do this, I have no idea what his plan is because he's not telling me. So what we need to try to do is just sort of talk through the problem with the other person. That really helps them be present and then make sure that you're on the same page so that, like, if you let them drive, they know where they're picking up. And of course, there couldn't be do's without some don'ts. So the don'ts of pairing, according to me, don't throw your partner under the bus for mistakes. That's a trust breaking thing right there. Don't talk over them. Don't interrupt. Try not to interrupt, right? It's going to happen in a two-person conversation, but give them a chance to speak, exercise their brain, get their ideas out. Make sure you're paying attention to them. It's okay if they're wrong and you need to say, well, no, the right answer is whatever, but give them a chance to speak up. Don't work silently, like I said, because the other person might end up a little confused about what you're thinking. And of course, again, coming back to presence, don't check out while your partner is driving. And again, we've all done it where, maybe where we think we're done, and while the other person does a commit and opens a pull request, we're maybe going to the bathroom or checking Facebook or who knows what. That's still work that's going on, right? So try to be there while your partner does it. Try not to take complete control of where a solution goes. And of course, these things, there's going to be exceptions, right? It's perfectly okay to say, man, I think I'm a lot of my depth here. Tell me talk through what's going on here, but I'm going to let you do it. That's perfectly acceptable, whereas the other person just, well, you'll get your chance later, I'm just going to do this, right? Because that's not fun, being on the receiving end of that. I know I'm the type of social learner, right? So if I'm not socializing and I'm not doing the work either, I'm going to fall asleep. I can't stay mentally present in that kind of situation, and I think others are probably the same way. Try not to dictate. I know that we probably all have this temptation a lot where we know exactly what's going to happen next. Oh yeah, open bracket, control the, call this function, var x equals whatever. If the other person's driving, try not to do that, unless they've asked you to. That's sort of the mind meld dictator sort of thing. Being on the receiving end of that when you don't want to be is not fun. And I think we've probably all done that too. So figuring out the right way to switch driving is totally up to the pairs. teams all have different norms around that kind of stuff. But what I try to do is think about, okay, whose hands are on the keyboard? When my hands are on the keyboard, that's my time to kind of take the lead and try to resist the urge to just sort of tell your partner what to do when their hands are on the keyboard, is my rule of thumb. I think I can illustrate this with a bit of a metaphor, because this is the way it feels to me. How many times have we been pairing with someone, we go to start typing and they start calling out commands to type, and it confuses us because, number one, I was already trying to focus on what I believe I was going to type, but now that's lost and I'm thinking, what is this person talking about? Where are they going? Right? It's confusing because it can jar into your mental process. I think that could be compared to, let's say that we're working in a stock room. We got things to count, right? Boxes on the shelves. We got a checklist to go through. I'm counting things, let's see, 5 of these, 7 of these, and a few more of these, and someone walks up behind you and starts going 27, 28, 29, 30. And then when you turn around and look at them, they kind of go, can you count? What's the matter? It's a similar thing, right? Each person needs to be able to exercise their brain. We're all thinking about things before we actually touch the keyboard, and we need to be able to express them. So bringing it back to the outcomes we talked about at the beginning, I believe what these practices will bring you are higher trust, more creativity, an environment of learning, and higher quality in general. That said, I'd love to hear other people's thoughts about this. Most of us in the room pair for a living. These are sort of the rules and the guidelines as I see them. I would love to hear other people's opinions or experiences. Does any of this resonate with you?
I have a question and I have experience. So,
Okay.
Do you take breaks often when you're here?
Yeah. It sort of depends. I don't have any hard and fast rule. Some people do. Some people just need to get up once every 45 minutes or whatever. I tend to just kind of feel out when is a good time to feel when's a good time to take a break. Maybe we just made a test go green or something. Hey, I'm going to celebrate with taking 5. Yeah, I just try to do it organically, but some people are a little more regimented about it. Yeah.
So in your experience with pairing, I know there's a kind of like a discovery phase on like new technology.
Yeah.
So like for instance, like documentation. Like what's your experience like with another pair? You guys with another technology, and you're like trying to research. Like how does that dynamic work? Are you both just like looking at the screen and both reading the document? You know what I mean? Like what's
Yeah, that's one that's kind of tricky. And that's definitely one of the more tedious aspects. Typically, we both go off, if we both are kind of at the same level of not knowing what we're trying to learn, and we've got stuff to read, we typically will split up, both hit the docs, maybe the GitHub page of the library we're using, or whatever it may be, or Stack Overflow, do some reading. And usually before long, there's like, okay, here's where I think we need to start. Let me Slack you this link for this thing that I'm looking at, or something like that. And we just sort of start riffing on it like that.
Yeah, my experience, you kind of just go off on your own computer sometimes and just Google it and kind of verbalize what you're finding.
Yeah.
Try to get a solution.
That's my experience too.
Yeah.
And I think that typically works out pretty well, unless it's something that just is so far removed from your wheelhouse that you need to bring in like a third party, which happens.
It's hard to read things together.
Yes.
To Google together because people read at different speeds and internalize things differently.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, I'm 100% with you. I always go to my own computer.
Yep.
Maybe we're pairing on a client machine, but I'll always have my Pillar MacBook with me, which is perfect. I'll break it out. I'll read on my own, because you're right. 2 people trying to Google together is like untenable, right? One person's reading, the other person goes back. Nah, let me go back to the results page and look at the next result. It's just not very fun. David, yeah.
How do you handle when 2 pairs, when 2 people come at different times, come and leave work at different times? How would you advise?
Oh, when they come and go at different times?
Yes.
Yeah, I try to let that roll to a certain extent. Now, if the other person wants to be 4 hours solo at night while I'm not there, that's a little different. But I know what I do. Sometimes I'll tend to start and end a little later than other people. Usually what I'll do is when the other person says, okay, I gotta go, we talk through, okay, here's what we think we're gonna do, here's what I'm gonna spend my time doing, and then what I always try to do is when I'm done, I Slack them a small message about like, okay, bullet point list of here's what I did, here's the branch we're on. Take a look when you get in the morning, and we'll talk about it when I get in. And that's typically works pretty well. Yeah, the end of the day update is definitely a thing. You can ask people who've paired with me, because you don't want them coming in the morning and thinking, well, where did the other guy lead off, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Outside of the social aspect, when we're talking with candidates, people always want to know what's the biggest challenge in a pair programming environment. And the obvious is, well, you're working with someone day in and day out all day long. But what is, in your opinion, the biggest challenge, and then maybe the biggest positive aspect of pair programming for someone who's brand new to it?
The biggest challenge is I would say, is getting out of your comfort zone. Probably. The more I think about that, I guess I've got two answers. The biggest challenge, number one, was, at least for me, was getting out of my comfort zone. Like I said, I'm used to working solo, listening to music, things like that. I knew I'd have to give up all that me time that I got during my work day. That was an adjustment. Now, on the flip side of that, one of the biggest benefits has been by exercising that discipline that I know I need, which I have to, I don't have a choice, but giving up all that stuff, that goes back to what I was saying earlier about how much I've learned. I've progressed so much as a programmer that it's been totally worth it. Would do it again 10 out of 10 times. I would say another big challenge that definitely comes up and has to kind of be handled case by case is personality conflicts. We've all been through them, right? Some people either don't have the same kind of social tools that we do. That's definitely a challenge when it happens. It hasn't been terribly common in my experience, although I've seen it. And then case by case, maybe you have to have a direct conversation with that person, or maybe they sort of figure it out as they get to know you. It kind of depends. But yeah, that's a challenge.
How often do you switch pairs typically?
That's definitely a team norm. I've seen it done every which way. I've done daily pair switching. David probably remembers that. I've done, fixed schedule. I know on Gap Poet when I was there with Derek, it was every Monday after stand-up I think we switched. I've been on teams where there was no formal schedule. That works a little bit better with a small team when you've only got 3 pairs or something like that, where it's just, let's kind of figure out where an organic place to switch is. Maybe one pair just finished a story and another one's at a good midway point in theirs. I find that the bigger the team gets, the more need you have to actually just, let's make a rule, because we got to just make sure it happens. Breaking up pair marriages intentionally is definitely a thing, because we might like to pair with the same person for a long time because we're buds or what have you, or we get along really well, but you do sort of miss out on the cross-pollination that you get with other teammates. So it's sort of the same issue that you run into working alone, where you have blind spots you don't realize. 2 people working together for a long time can develop blind spots together. So that's why it's good to rotate at some frequency that makes sense for the team.
About outsized teams.
Yeah, I've been there too, and we usually have one person who's a floater, and they may either pick stuff up if there are small stories to play solo, or be a triple. Neither one's great, right? Because soloing is not something we normally do.
Or we've had people that third wheel would be spiking or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Something new.
Yeah, we've done that too, and I know being that third person is not fun and is not very effective because they're at the pairing station, you're sitting behind them a lot of the time or something along those lines. Yeah, it's just not an ideal situation. We try to never have odd numbered teams, but obviously it happens sometimes. Hopefully never long term. Just have to kind of roll with it.
That's what mobbing.
Yeah.
2 people is very more than two is mobbing.
Yeah, he's right. Yeah, 3 or more you're mobbing. Sometimes we intentionally mob, but that's when we all want to figure something out that no one knows the answer to, right? That's a deliberate thing. Doing that as part of your normal pair switching cadence is probably not very good. I've been there and it's like, oh boy, it's boring. And it's not a good use of that person's billable time, really.
If you have someone, let's say you do have an even number, but someone is sick, do you ever take someone that isn't on a project or is working on a bench project or something and use that as an opportunity to bring them up?
Sometimes. Yeah, sometimes a forge project might take someone who's on the bench and use a little bit of their time. And it might be because the team has a need. Oh, this person knows a lot of Angular and they're on the bench. Why don't we get them over here to uplift the team a little bit? Or maybe it's that they need to learn. That definitely happens sometimes. It depends on what the project is, because sometimes there's so much overhead as far as domain knowledge that you need that maybe it just doesn't make any sense to do that. So it depends on what the team is, what the project is. Seen it done though.
Does the skill set of the person or the skill level influence how or who's paired together, or is that really more when you're selecting the team for the project, you want to make sure you have the right skills, and then like the level, I'm just thinking like, do you have a really experienced person paired with a less experienced, or does that not matter?
Generally, yeah, skill set and experience that we tend to think about that in terms of team composition rather than pairings. Ideally, everyone pairs with everyone at some point. I'm not sure I've been on a team where that hasn't happened, or at least not where it's intentionally not happened. That is something that can be sort of an issue, right? Because if you've got one person who's veteran, maybe Magnus, and somebody who's like not very experienced at all, like this gentleman over here, perhaps, and maybe that's frustrating for the person who's mentoring. Maybe it's not. I've actually worked with some great people. I know R.J. Osborne in OVR, who actually I think he just had his last day this week. Unfortunately, he'll be a big loss. Yeah, lots of tears. He was a fantastic mentor. I think he's been programming for 30 years or something like that. He taught me some stuff that I'll never forget in terms of. No, I don't mean socially, I mean actual technical things, because he never was too busy to just slow it down and show me things. And that helped me, that was very formative for me as a partner, but also it was uplift. And we need people like that, right? Not everyone, it's a challenge for the person doing the mentoring for sure, but I hope that we all find the time to just sort of uplift our partner. Yeah.
I've actually found success even with both people in a pair in experience. Like I just completed a virtual reality project in the OVR region, and no one on the team had experience programming in Unity, but we all made it work in a month time frame, and then we all learned a lot. And also, I remember another project that I came onto, and I didn't know the team very well, and I had like a bias in my head for this one guy. I was like, I want to pair with this guy because he knows what he's doing. And I go over there and I sit down. I'm like, how long have you been on this project? I'm excited to learn from you. And they're like, oh, I just started too. I don't know anything. And I was like, oh, yeah, great. This is going to be a miserable day. But by the end of the day, we finished our card and we worked it out together. So that was extremely rewarding to me to see that. Just having two people working on a problem logically, we can still accomplish things even if we don't have the relevant background experience.
Yeah, I've definitely had experiences like that too. That's a great success story. If both people sort of have at least a certain, like the right technical baseline, and they're both motivated, they can usually figure stuff out together. Two heads are better than one. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. I find that to be very, very true.
So I've experienced, first time I pair programmed was 5 years ago, and the guy was a real quiet kind of guy, nice guy, but he would take the keyboard, like you said, he would just keep typing. So the second guy I did was to ask him questions and say, hold on a second. I was like, what are you doing? So I had to do that because otherwise he would never have spoken. So asking questions a lot to interrupt them. Sometimes you just have to do that after that guy. So that worked, and he was fine with it. It's just a technique you have to use.
That's a great point. I don't know that I've deliberately realized how important that is, but I think I sort of do that. This is another thing where just how you phrase it makes all the difference, right? You can say, "Hey, what are you doing?" "Hey, tell me something. Talk to me." Yeah. Or you can just kind of say, What are you up to? Yeah. Asking the right questions makes all the difference, right?
Yeah. If you stop them and have a question when you stop them, then it feels natural to them. It's not like you stop them because you're irritated or something.
Yeah.
Because every time I stop them and ask a question, I learn something. So So that's how I introduce all of it every time, so.
Yeah, that's great. I'll remember that.
It's just want to say that pairing is a two-way street, so it is your responsibility as a driver to go slow enough and to explain things to your pair, and it is your pair's responsibility to ask questions and to follow what the driver is doing.
Mm-hmm.
Two-way street.
Yeah, you're right. I think we're right about at time here, people. Anything else before we call it?
Even.
Oh, great.
Thanks, Magnus. Thank you. All right.